All right, in this lecture, it's the second one on the topic of stress. I want to talk about some of the measures of stress, some of the different scales, because while it is a concept that I think we all understand when we say I'm experiencing a lot of stress, there's not a good way to measure or to capture like who's under a lot of stress, right? Or you might perceive yourself to be under more stress, but there's not a good way to measure it. So if you refer to your chapter outline, one of the original models was something called the social readjustment scale. And the idea was, if you can read those, there's 43 different life events. And when you scored 100, when you had 100 points, you were considered to be stressed out. Well, if you look at it, it's got things like death of your partner, death of your parents, unemployment, you moved. It also doesn't account for things that might be good, might be positive. So if you get a new job, while that job may come with more money, and you may get to move a place you've always want, there's still stress associated with that because it requires a lot of demands. So this scale is what we call life-changed units, 100 life-changing units. While this one was sort of in the beginning of attempting to measure, it's not, it's no longer sort of in use because it's really outdated, and you might be under a lot. It doesn't have things like, lockdown for a pandemic or your technology not working, right? So that one is sort of it was an older one. And then coming along into the 80s, there was something, it was introduced the idea or suggested that instead of thinking about stress as these like big events, that a better way to conceptualize this concept was what was referred to as daily hassles. And I'm gonna argue that this is a better way to conceptualize what we mean by stress, are these daily hassles. So they're the little things. They're the little things that build up, or they have what's called an accumulating. Ooh, I don't know if it's on here, but it is on the quiz that daily hassles have an accumulation effect. It's the little stuff. It's that you get up in the morning and there's no sugar for your coffee. You can't find your keys. You're out of gas. It's all these things that just one right after another. And that's a better way to think about stress, because you might have one big event, but that big event is broken down into all these little things. Or maybe I'm trying to think of some good examples, but it's all that little stuff. And when you constantly live in an environment that has all these little stuff all the time, that has it wears you down. So a really important point to make when we talk about stress is that stress does not make you sick. Let me say it again. Stress does not make you sick. Stress uses up your resources so that when you get sick, you don't have any extra resources to fight it off. So a classic experiment took some young people and kept them up late at night, all night long, right? And this puts on a physical stress. Like when we talked about eating, sometimes, well, maybe we didn't, but sometimes when you're tired, we feel hungry because our body is stressed out, it needs energy, and we read that need for energy as food, where you could also go to sleep and you'd probably wouldn't be hungry. But anyway, so I took this group of young people and they kept them awake late at night, and overnight. One group, they kept up all night. The other group, they let get plenty of sleep. And then they exposed them to the common cold virus. The group that had gotten enough sleep had extra resources they could fight off that virus. But the group that didn't get sleep, that was physically stressed, they were more likely to develop cold symptoms. Right. So if you're listening to the stuff about the pandemic, we're hearing that there's a disproportion, right? That there are certain populations that are suffering more. You can associate that, and they're often obese people, people who are already smoking, poor people, right? And these are measures of accumulative environmental stress. Being poor is stressful. It wears your social resources. You have fewer aging, wrinkles, and that is the opposite of aging is healing and cell repair. People who age poorly are under more stress. So aging is the physical, visible signs of stress on one's body and one's face and one's skin. When you can resist or heal, right? And if you use all your resources just for survival, there's no resources left for healing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So that's what you have in this box here. You have the daily hassles, and then a way that we deal with stress are the daily uplifts. And I think this is important too, because when we talk about well-being in the next chapter and the chapter on disorders, when we talked about emotion in the previous one, and we talked about it relative to stress, one thing or one element that helps us resist stress is social interaction and being with other people. So daily uplifts are connecting with our friends, are laughing, are having positive social interactions. And so the moment that we're living in right now, where it's harder to have those personal interactions and we're dealing with all of this uncertainty, which inherently is what we mean by stress, right? Situations we can't do anything about, we're told to stay home. There's all this mystery, right? That is a very stressful situation that we are living in, and it's difficult, or it's harder, or there are fewer opportunities for these daily uplifts. So that stress creates this accumulative phenomena. And as time goes on, people might be feeling worse and worse and worse. It's this accumulative nature of stress. And that's kind of what's on if you look at that bottom box down there where they talk about more sources of stress. So your environment, you can be living in an unhealthy environment. We've already talked about it's poor. It's stressful to be poor, to not constantly like, how am I going to pay rent? It's causing a lot of people a lot of stress right now, like how they lost their job, they're having difficulty getting into the unemployment. This can be very stressful. Uncertainty and fear, right? Am I going to have a job when this is over? Might I get sick? These are, if you are feeling stress or you know people who are feeling stress, it makes sense. It is a perfectly logical response to some very illogical events. And then the textbook that I made these slides from also talked about a phenomena called it's culture. It's to when you embrace a culture or you acclimate to a culture, and that can be very difficult, right? There can be a lot of stress, and what do you do with your culture? And I'm not going to ask any questions about that, but that's what that refers to. And then in the next video, I want to talk about the relationship between your stress and your health. We know you've all probably experienced it. You're under a lot of stress and you get sick. And again, since stress doesn't make you sick, how exactly does that happen? And I'll talk about that in the third video.